Lindstrom. Welcome back to Light-Minded Arts, where I've been on a journey to go from Hammer to Hollywood, and I want to help you go from being a struggling artist to a working creative. I am very excited today because I have a very special guest with us. He's a journalist, a novelist, a writing coach, John DeDakis. John is a former editor on CNN's The Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer. During John's 45-year career in journalism, he was a White House correspondent during Ronald Reagan's presidency. John is the author of a 6 award-winning mystery suspense thriller novel series, plus he's a manuscript editor and a motivational speaker. John's specialty is helping wannabe writers become published authors. He also inspires people struggling with grief to use writing as a way to find healing. John, welcome to the show. Tell me, did you always know that you wanted to be a writer?
Hi, Brent. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I don't think I knew I wanted to be a writer. I was always kind of intrigued by books and the words on the page, and I can remember at a very young age, experimenting with my mom's Royal typewriter and, trying to hunt and peck and, make something coherent out of it. But the idea of actually becoming a writer didn't really happen until I'd been a journalist for several years. I was at CNN and they made me an editor, which was tedious, and it paid well, but I needed a creative outlet. And so that's when I started to experiment with writing fiction.
And you say you were there for how many years before you decided writing?
I was at CNN 25 years, and probably within the first 10 years or so of being at CNN, I started to play with fiction.
Now, as a journalist, were you actually doing a lot of the writing, or were you out reporting?
I was a reporter before I joined CNN, first in radio, then joined television. I was in the Army as an Army broadcaster stationed in Frankfurt, Germany at the American Forces Network. I covered the White House when Reagan was president. And so I didn't join CNN until 1988 as a writer. So I'd been a reporter for 20 years up until that point. And then within a year after they hired me as a writer, then they made me an editor. So as a writer, you're basically writing what the anchors read, and as an editor, you're sort of the last line of defense before the copy gets to the anchor.
I always look at it, some of these shows and watching the people talk to us, and I feel like, oh wow, those guys are so clever and so witty. How did they come up with this? And then it's like, oh, they got a team of writers behind them. So
you know what? Not always.
Oh, really?
A lot of it is ad lib nowadays.
Really?
And the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer, which is the show I worked on in the last 7 years, it's scripted, but a lot of it is ad lib, especially the interviews. I mean, and Wolf has, all of the anchors need to be able to ad lib and just roll with it, because it's by nature a breaking news venue. And so it's a mix of script and ad lib.
That's interesting. So I'm actually learning here because I know absolutely nothing about the world of journalism. I've never been involved in it. I don't think we even had a journalist thing in our school when it's coming up to this. I don't. This is out.
They didn't. They didn't when I was coming up either. And here's the thing: there are so many people now who have strong opinions about journalism and have no clue whatsoever how it really works.
Yeah, and then you get the political aspect going into it, and all of a sudden nobody even trusts any journalism anymore. And I don't know any of that. Whether how much is true or not true, but it's really interesting to me to know or to see of someone else's perspective who's actually in that world. Now, you also said that you've interviewed people like Alfred Hitchcock. He's like one of my heroes. I mean, what was that like?
Right. Well, it was one of those things that just dropped in my lap serendipitously. I had just arrived at the American Forces Network, and I was working for Herb Glover, who was the head of a radio bureau, interview bureau, and he actually became the head of the network eventually before he retired. And Herb had a mentor's heart. He used to work at CBS with Walter Cronkite, and he trusted this 23-year-old kid not to screw it up, because Herb could have done the interview in his sleep, and he trusted me with it. And that was really a life-changing experience, because Hitchcock was my hero too. And, probably the most famous person I'd ever met or interviewed up until that point. And it was definitely a memorable experience. I was one-on-one with him for 40 minutes in his hotel room, and we talked about, he was promoting Frenzy, which was his penultimate movie. And so, we talked for a long time, and he was so gracious, very approachable, easy to talk with, talked slowly. And, it was just, I learned a lot from that experience.
Yeah, I think that would be just fascinating. I mean, did you have like some off discussion, off recording time with them, just one-on-one to shoot the bull, I guess,
at work? No, not really. Didn't shoot the bull. You try in an interview to not do that, because you want it to be spontaneous.
Oh, okay.
And we didn't really, I covered everything I wanted to cover in the interview, and he's a busy guy, so I was intimidated, so it was like, thank you very much, phew, and I left. But I did get a chance to ask him, I got a chance to go deep with him during the interview, because he was giving me these long canned answers, because he'd been asked, these questions a gazillion times. And I always, in my interviews, like to go deep. And I remember asking him, I've heard it said that you're afraid of death. Is that true? And of course, he's the master of suspense, the macabre, that kind of stuff. And he'd been giving these long answers, and he said, no, it's not true. That's it. Well, I had some follow-up questions, because in radio, dead air, as you know, is that's death. And so I had a couple of follow-up questions, and I asked him, I said, I know that you were educated at a Jesuit seminary. Did that have any influence on your view of life after death? And he said, no. And he relaxed, and he said, but it did help me to think more clearly. And then I asked him point blank what his opinion of life after death is. And he said, I haven't really thought about that. And then he riffs for the next 2 minutes about how all thought is energy. And if we had a strong enough instrument, we could hear the voice of Henry VIII. And so, I got him to go in a direction he hadn't really planned or had thought about much.
That's cool. I think that's a unique gift to be able to dig into somebody on the spot, especially when you're with somebody who would probably be super intimidating. I mean, 23 years old. I don't know if I would have just been squinting both like, hi.
Sure.
Can I?
Right.
Can I just think your autograph? We'll call this interview done.
And I never got his autograph. Go figure.
Yeah, I remember growing up, Birds was one of my favorite movies with his, and I just watched that over and over. It was so weird and creepy. It was fun.
Well, and I'll add one more little anecdote here, because I know film is, one of your passions. And he told me that he shot Psycho, and he shot Psycho in black and white partly because of the shower scene. He wanted the blood to be a little more understated. And the context of this conversation was that it was right around this time that the motion picture industry came out with the rating system. And he thought that it really was an insult to the viewer, and he felt, and he used as an example a conversation that he had with a kid, a 12-year-old boy, who said, "Mr. Hitchcock, in Psycho, what did you use for blood?" He said, this kid knew it wasn't real blood, and he said, I told him I used chocolate sauce.
That's funny. Well, I guess wait. I don't want to stick too long on Alfred Hitchcock. I mean, you're fascinating. I think that the chance to interview him at that age is pretty amazing. But let's feel about, because you also did a few other things. You became a keynote speaker and different things. Why don't you share with us some of that journey aside from just being a journalist and then also starting to veer into novels?
Fair enough. As I mentioned that I was at CNN, they made me an editor. It was tedious, and so that's when I started writing fiction, which was in the mid 70s or mid 90s, and it took 10 years for me to get my first novel published. It took me that long to get the agent that I have. I'm still with her 20 years later. The novel went through 14 major revisions, and she's the 39th agent that I queried. So I tell my writing students, take good notes, and I'll save you 9 years in the process. And when the first novel came out, I went to a writer's conference and someone handed me their 150,000 word tome and said, give it a quick read and tell me what you think. Well, with me, there's no such thing as a quick read, and it needs work isn't going to be very helpful. So I started monetizing it because by the time I got published, I knew all the mistakes that I'd been making and was able to deconstruct the process for people. So I became a manuscript editor, a writing coach, and a writing workshop leader. And so by the time my third novel came out, Troubled Water, in 2013, I think that was, I was able to retire from CNN and write full time and devote myself to being a coach and a writing teacher. So I basically glided into a second career that included keynote speaking, but that's something where I'm going now. I'm trying to go beyond the writing community to help people in all walks of life to use writing as a way to heal from grief. Because grief is a universal experience and doesn't even mean that you need to have lost a loved one or anything like that. It can be the loss of a pet, a job, a relationship, your health, your innocence. And so I'm working with wellness programs at corporations, hospitals, hospice programs, all of those things to try to widen the net.
So are you going to still keep writing novels, or are you just completely shifting focus to the to speaking and
Oh, I'm just loading myself up. And, I mean,
can't
I've
slow
learned.
down?
No, but I mean, you prioritize, and you can't do everything at once. I'm working on book 7 in the series. It's I've got about 6 chapters into it. It's on hold right now. I've got procrastination nailed. That's part of the process.
Never did a day.
I've
Well, you
written
can put off till tomorrow, right?
Oh yeah, I'm great at that, and I've written a memoir, and I'm starting to shop that around. And so yeah, I've got plenty to do, and then this is just adding one more thing. So a lot of things have had to kind of go on the wayside while I ramp this speed.
You did 14 pretty big revisions of that first novel, and I'm wondering, does it get any easier? Because in my writing still, I probably do at least 12 to 14 revisions on each of my novels, and I've written half a dozen, but you also come from a background of being able to really focus on the editing, and you know your stuff. So has that shrunken down a little bit? Is your process simplified over the years, or is it still a big process?
Oh, that's a good question. No, I don't think I've done anything that has gone through 14 revisions. I think that the second novel went through maybe 4. The one after that went through 3. Maybe the one after that went through 8. I think 8 was maybe one of the higher ones. But I've learned to be more efficient, and so I think that first novel I learned a lot of lessons that have spilled over in the subsequent ones.
And did the journalism help you get to that point, or was it working with your agent and their editors that kind of helped you tighten things up?
Well, it always helps to have a second pair of eyes, and my agent is an editor, and the publishers have been editors as well. Plus, I use beta readers. These are people you don't have to pay who will give you honest feedback about what's not working, because there comes a point, as you know, that you get so close to the manuscript that you're not objective about it anymore.
Yeah.
So having that extra pair of eyes is priceless. And then, that's part of the process. You asked about journalism, and I think that too prepared me to write novels, because journalism, whether it's print or broadcast, you only have a limited amount of real estate or time, and so you must write tight. Every word has to count. And so that's true whether it's a 30-second reader or a 80,000 word novel. Every sentence needs to be clear and pristine.
So I guess my next question I have for you is, more could do with your books. So your books, your main character is Lark Chadwick. She's the main character through all of these, and she starts out as a young 20-something-year-old. Is that right?
That's right. Her backstory is she was sexually assaulted when she was in college. That trauma caused her to drop out. She tries to write the great American novel. It keeps getting rejected. And the story begins when she discovers the body of the aunt who raised her from infancy. And that launches Lark on a quest to find out more about her past. She ends up going into journalism, which is my background. And so that is what her story arc is as she goes forward through all 6 of these books.
So I can kind of see then that because you're obviously not a 20-something-year-old not had or girl,
You've noticed. You've noticed.
Yeah, but the dualism aspect is there, and so that kind of feeds into the write what you know sort of a vibe, and then I don't know how some of her other trials, the college experience and things like that fit into there. But Nadia could speak to us a little bit because I know that you're pretty passionate about writing what you know, and how does that fit into this kind of a thing?
Well, and it actually fits in with how does an old guy, write as a 20-something young woman, and that was probably easier than I expected it would be. I didn't really set out to do that in any kind of a calculated way, but when I started writing fiction, someone suggested that I should write in a way that stretches who I am. Never been a woman, at least not in this life. So I gave it a try, and I discovered that emotions are not gender specific. We all have the exact same emotions. It's just that in my experience, it's the women in my life who are more willing to share their emotions, and they're more articulate about the emotions when they share them. And so I was at CNN surrounded by young women in their early to mid 20s who would let me ask questions about what it's like to be a woman. And they tell me their stories about their boyfriends, their careers, their, families and all that kind of stuff. And then they became my beta readers. And so I was getting really knowledgeable feedback. And so that contributed to the write what you know well of creativity, because I was asking questions and then listening, because when you're listening, you're learning. Guys really could learn to do that. Listen to the women in your life because they have a lot to say.
I had that experience just recently because I had a 20-something-year-old lady reading one of my novels. She's also an editor, but she was reading, it wasn't even my novel, it was my screenplay that I'm working on right now. And she started raising really interesting issues about it because the main character in that is also, like a 20-something-year-old, kind of her age, her background, kind of lifestyle. And so she was pointing out things to me that I hadn't even considered, that this person is coping with something that I've actually gone through, and now you need to be sensitive that this is going to add, people are going to identify with this person and may need to be able to move with that. And I've written the other quite a bit in my work. I mean, I've got one book where it's a little girl coming up, it's my book, One for the Money, Two for the Soul. And I like writing the other person a lot, because if I was just to write about what I know, like super specifically, contractor or whatever, I don't know, it feels a little bit stale to me.
Right. I think you're right. I think that is an important part of being a writer. You need to be open to the world around you and the people around you. And I actually teach a class on interviewing and listening. And because I think that, we need to be able to cultivate conversations with all kinds of people who are not our age, our gender, our ethnicity, our socioeconomic background. All those things will broaden our horizon and enrich our writing.
I couldn't agree more, and honestly, it's just fun too when you're it's just writing.
You think?
I'm easily distracted. I'm easily bored, but it's fun to write something that maybe you don't know, but you can add what you do know to help make it real. And I don't know, but question for you: how has the landscape for writing changed? Because you've had a pretty rich career in journalism. You've been writing for several years now, and really the way things are accelerating in the publishing world is, I mean, it's like warp speed. So what are some of the changes that you're noticing, and what do you think about that?
Well, I think that, I mean, if you have an idea for a story, whether it's a memoir that's thematic or a novel, now more than ever, there's a good chance that you'll be able to get published. It'll be harder to get published traditionally, but not impossible, just because the number of traditional publishers has shrunk considerably. But there are indie publishers, sort of, they're not exactly self-publishing, but you probably will have to pay a little for the different packages that they provide, editing, book cover design, depending on what you feel you need. And then there is self-publishing. So, there are any number of avenues now that make it available for you to get a book published. I always counsel my students to try the traditional approach first. Try to get an agent, because that will bring your writing to a professional level. Because sadly, a lot of self-published books have the reputation, in some cases well-deserved, of not being very, very good because they don't have any editorial oversight. The writer was impatient to get it published. They didn't hire an editor. Consequently, it's flabby, riddled with typos, and who's going to want to read that?
I just bought a book on Amazon yesterday because I wanted to review it and see if, I like to review books at the review, and then I can get some reviews back and things like that. But I was reviewing this one book, and it was completely written by AI. You could tell it was
You could tell.
ChatGPT, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I got through the whole book. It was a short little novella, and I'm just like, I cannot, in good faith, actually leave a review because this is so terrible. They even edited it before they went off and published it. I mean, they just typed in, "Give me a book about this, make it funny," and that was it.
Yeah. Did you get a sense of how many people reviewed it?
I'm pretty sure that they probably read through it once after it was done. Maybe they edited a few pieces there, but I'm
No, but
pretty
I
sure
mean,
that it never
how
went
many?
through Hercule Heidegger.
No, but how many reviews did they actually get on Amazon?
They got about half a dozen reviews. Most of them are 3 to 5 stars, but it could be family.
Okay, I think I've heard that if you get up to 50, that's a good thing.
Yeah, gotta work on those, and it's hard as a new self-published person to actually get those. So, I mean, now you actually have gone the traditional route, and you are going a traditional route. Is that right?
I'm traditionally published, but even traditionally published authors need to do most of their own marketing. So that's still the common thread publishing these days, because that's another big change in publishing. Because even if you get a book deal with Random House today, gone are the days where they're going to pay for your cross-country book tour, unless you're John Grisham and you don't need the publicity. So life's not fair, and I think a lot of wannabe writers forget that it's on them to sell books.
So, being with them, though, does have to come with some advantage. Did they give you any indication of how to market your book? Because I know as a self-published person, you're shooting in the dark. You might be trying Facebook ads. You might be trying, different things. But do they give you kind of an outline of things that maybe you should be doing to make it successful?
Yeah, my first publisher was really good on that, and actually, presented a course on promotion, and that was really helpful. And a lot of those lessons have stuck with me. And the internet is full of of guidance on how to market effectively. And one of the things that I've discovered about marketing is that it's not selling, it's telling. You're just letting people know that you've written a book. You don't have to take them by the lapels and convince them. You just let them know. You try to be, intriguing and enticing, but, it's up to them. You don't have to persuade. And so really, most of marketing is just finding different ways to find people.
That's an interesting take. I like it. To think. So, if you were just starting out, you had just graduated high school, maybe you're still in high school even, but you're just coming into this world, you want to be a creative, maybe you don't have the financial stability to go full-time. It kind of took you a couple years before your books actually started making enough money that you could make a transition. Is that right?
No, I'm living on Social Security.
Uh,
I make more money on manuscript editing and the teaching and stuff like that. If you are writing in order to get rich quick, it's probably not going to happen.
so what would you
That
tell
was one of the
somebody
big.
who's fresh out of school and wanting to start getting into creative writing?
I would say get a job, get a day job. Don't necessarily get an MFA or, something like that. I think what you need to do is do what you're good at and what you love. Really put your energy in that. And I mean, if that is going to pay the bills, wonderful. But always do what you're good at and what you love. But you may have to get a day job to support yourself. And yet that's not wasted time because every experience that you've got is grist for your fiction because you are fueling your creative well. Every experience does that. And so there is no lost effort, even if you're doing a job that you hate and sucks, but it pays well. Do it because you're going to learn a lot. You're going to meet interesting people who may show up as characters in a future book.
I was when I was back in high school. I actually started working construction when I was 13, and because my dad was a contractor, and so he kind of set me with his trades and things. And so I wonder what doing that, but he'd have me doing all these jobs, and I hated them so bad. And I thought, I am never going into construction when I'm older. And then when I graduated from college, I went straight into construction. And and along the way, I met just some of the most interesting people, had the most amazing experience. I remember I was working on this one property, and we had to cap a well, and this guy comes along to help us cap the well, and I mean, he's missing half his teeth, and he talked like some hillbilly. It was just such an interesting man, and he was so knowledgeable in what he did, but I could have just sat down and interviewed him for hours and just had a really fun and amazing experience because he was such a character, and I probably would have never met him if I hadn't have been doing what I was doing. And yeah, I agree. Maybe you don't want to be doing the job you're doing to support your art, but sometimes you still gotta be responsible.
Well, did you go into construction just out of inertia or just to get the paying job? Because you still had a creative side to you. So why did you go into construction?
So at the time, I didn't actually know that I was going to go into anything creative. At the time, I was actually studying to work on Wall Street. And so I was doing that, but then my dad, his business had grown quite a bit, and I could see that he had a very strong business background. If I'm going to go work on Wall Street and work with all these financial companies, I need to have a good a good business background. So I said, yes, I'll come work with you in your business. But I told him I'm only going to be here a couple of years because I just want the experience and to know the business. And so I ended up doing that. And then as I got going, he started getting close to wanting to retire. And then the inertia carried me through into taking over that business for him. So I ended up not going the Wall Street route. But yeah, that's how I ended up in the construction industry.
Life doesn't turn out the way you expect. And that's, in journalism, it's a crisis. In real life, or in journalism, it's a story. In real life, it's a crisis. And in fiction, it's a plot twist. And we all have them. And that's how stories get told. That's how our lives, the story of our life plays out. And that's how our stories play out, cause and effect.
So what lessons in your journey do you think have actually meant the most to you?
Oh, man. That's a tough one because there have been so many lessons along the way, a lot of lessons that I learned, through trial and error, making mistakes, things I'm not proud of. As far as writing is concerned, just getting the feedback that it could be better, going to writers' conferences, taking classes, reading books, getting better at my craft because I had the desire and I knew I could get better. So, that was one of the lessons. And I think another lesson has been just being willing to listen to the people I'm around because when you're listening, you're learning. And so, those are some of the things that, I picked up along the way. Not sure if that's a satisfying answer.
No, that's great. My wife always accuses me of not listening good enough, and Then when I do these kind of these interviews and things, I have to expend so much energy to focus on listening and being engaged. It's so hard to actually be present in the moment for someone like me. Some people it just comes real easy, but I don't know. I agree though.
I think it takes practice. Being in the moment, I think, is critical. That's actually, if we're talking about lessons learned, that's a lesson I learned during COVID. My sister-in-law gave my wife a book written by Eckhart Tolle, Tolle. Maybe it's pronounced Tolle. I'm not sure. The book is called The Power of Now. It was written in 1995. The author was suicidal. He's German. He was suicidal at the time and realized that we spend most of our time regretting the past and fearing the future, and we're no good in the moment. And so what he's done is he wrote a book about how to cultivate the moment. And that was a really important lesson because, that's the only moment, that's the only time you have any control over your life is the moment. And so that was an important lesson that I learned.
I'm gonna have to look up that book then because yeah, I tend to avoid the regret pretty easily, but the looking forward thing, that is something that I'm always doing, and it's always what am I going to be doing next? What am I going to say next? What's the next step from here? And I tend to lose focus of the moment. So
Welcome to the human race.
sometimes I wish I was a little above human. That I think there was a saying once that said that that we were all created equal, but some of us outgrew it, or something to that effect.
I hadn't heard that one.
But
I've heard some are more equal than others. I've heard that.
I like that will do. You kind of touched on this too a little bit earlier, but are there any specific habits from journalism that translate over into writing?
Yes. Don't wait for the muse because you don't have time in journalism. You're under the gun, you're on deadline, and you have to write whether you feel like it or not. You can't have this, you can't light a candle and get everybody, everybody, I'm trying to write. No, the newsroom is going to go, screw it, dude, deal with it. And so, in journalism, you just need to learn to shut out all the white noise and concentrate. And that really was a helpful tie over for writing fiction.
I completely agree. I remember, because I spend most of my mornings writing, and usually I spend the second half of my days focusing on marketing and filmmaking and things. But like some mornings, I don't feel like writing. I'll look at my stuff and I'm just like, I don't know where to go from here. And so I might read a few paragraphs ahead, but if I'm not feeling it, I just have to start writing. Even if it's free writing, I might delete it all, but I found that as you get going, then the flow starts coming, but it might take a little bit of time to get into it.
I think you're right. I think you hit it on the head.
Yeah, writer's block is, I hate the word, I hate philosophy, and
it's fear. It's fear-based. You're afraid of making mistakes, and you're going to. You're going to fail. You're going to be rejected. That's part of it. And it's not nearly as awful as you expected. But, first drafts are discovery drafts. You're just trying to figure out what's there. So, any mistake you make is fixable.
I always consider that first draft. Anytime I do a first draft, it's going to be complete garbage.
Totally. It's a steaming pile of clay.
Exactly. So what would you think, if I was in your creative process, what is the hardest thing about writing?
The hardest thing is looking at the blank page. And I think the other hardest thing is because I'm so good at procrastination, I'm able to circle and circle and circle and not get anywhere. And yet what I've discovered is that if you're ruminating about your story, that's writing too. And so I try to counsel early, rookie writers not to beat themselves up too much if they're not just sitting there and writing, because thinking about that story is part of the process. And as you said just a minute ago, once you get your fingers moving, that then is like putting little flashlights on your knuckles that throw just enough light down the path for the next sentence or two. And it's once you get going, that's where the magic can happen. But it's still hard when you don't really know, you haven't really gotten to the end yet. I think editing for me is much more fun because there's been that major sense of accomplishment. It's done, it sucks, but it's done, and then I can go back and make it better. And I love that exercising that left brain side of buffing and polishing and making it more coherent.
That sounds so much like my own creative process. It's almost uncanny. And that also speaks to what you mentioned earlier too. Is go out and get that job to help support your creative side because you're not likely to make it with the creative side alone. At least the vast majority of it probably won't right out the gate. But when I was thinking about what he's just saying, it reminded me that when I when I was writing my books and doing my construction at the same time, I'm really good at construction, and I can almost go to work blindfolded and I just do my job. It's kind of like driving a car, and after half an hour, you get where you're going, and you don't realize you don't know how you got there because you were so in your own mind. It
Right.
it's like when you have that job that's actually providing income, you're good at it, and uh, you're just in your mind the whole time. I used a lot of that time to flesh out my books, to write my stories in my mind, thinking, what would happen
Right.
if this happened? Or wouldn't it be cool if this happened? And then every now and then I pull out my phone and I just take a quick note or something. But that really actually helped me because when it came to that blank page, I already knew what I wanted to write. It was right there.
Exactly. I think you've really described it in a very accessible and practical way. I think that makes so much sense, and obviously it works for you. And I think that's pretty much the way I do it too.
I think it worked for Ray Bradbury too. I was reading his biography or something about him once, and he didn't have a typewriter at home. He didn't have any way of putting words to page, and so he would develop his entire story in his mind. Then he would go to the library and write it all down in one sitting,
Yeah.
bring it out, and he's got a finished draft ready to go take to his editor or whoever.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, so for a lot of us, and he spoke to us a little bit too in some of your other works and things that, because you like to help people process grief and different things. Has writing actually helped you learn more about yourself? Then how does that work?
Oh man, I love that question because that is so important. I think, and this is something I teach in my writing classes, one of the things I tell my students is the better you know yourself, the better your writing will be because it will be coming from a place of authenticity. And everyone has had grief and loss. And so the advice I got when my sister took her life in 1980 was move toward the pain. And I had no idea what that meant. But I did inadvertently when I started writing my first novel 15 years after she died. And the first chapter is her death. I mean, it's not her story, but it was certainly influenced by it. I was on the scene that day, and so I wrote what I knew, and it's ripped from reality. And so fast forward, I've got 6 books in print over the last 20 years, and right around 2011, my youngest son went missing and was found dead in my car of an accidental heroin overdose. And so that collateral damage of the grief and loss surrounding that found its way into book 4, Bullet in the Chamber. And again, I was processing my grief. It was therapeutic and cathartic to work it through. It wasn't my story, but I was able to pour it into Lark, my protagonist, as a subplot, which deepened and enriched her character. And so now I look back on 20 years of having written, and even though I didn't consciously start out to write therapeutically, that's exactly what was happening. I can look back and see that all of my novels, I've been processing my grief through my protagonist. And, that's an important lesson that I've learned and that I'm now trying to teach other people.
Well, and I think it also speaks to how good your novels are. I was reading in Fast Track, your first novel there, how basically Lark comes and finds her friend basically dead in the house there, and when I was reading it, I could feel the emotion in it. I could
Thank
feel
you.
the. I mean, it was hooking me, and that's important from a writer's perspective because you want to hook the people. And novels, if they don't make you feel anything, then it's not gonna it's not gonna sell the work either. I don't think, but
And
I think that
yeah.
coming from that, helping people feel some kind of emotion, I think it only adds to your story. If you're trying to avoid your grief or your experiences and just try to say this is a fun story, whatever, and it's got no soul, who's gonna care?
Wow, you've just made my day. Thank you. Because, we haven't met before. You have no reason to praise my work. And that means so much because, it was ripped from reality. And it means a lot for any author to have someone say that you moved me, that it hooked me. I get responses from people who they end the book and they want to know more about Lark. They keep thinking about her. There was one experience I had when I wrote Troubled Water. There's a scene where Lark's mentor, Lionel Stone, has to go to Peru to identify the body of his daughter who died in a mountain climbing accident. And I wrote that scene before I had to identify my son's body in the morgue. And I just sort of imagined what it would be like. The details in my case were a lot different, but the emotional experience was the same. And I went back and I read that scene after Stephen died, and I found myself crying reading it because it felt real. And when I wrote Bullet in the Chamber, I was crying the whole time I wrote it. It's a catharsis. It's, crying is an emotional safety valve, and lo and behold, it can actually be it can be a medium where if you can get it on the page and you can, because we look, it's I'm sorry for being so jumbled in my thinking, but here's the point I want to make. When we're writing, when you're reading a story, you're trying to live vicariously. You're living vicariously through a character. And as a writer, you are trying to pour authenticity and make a fictional character come to life. And so it's the character that stands between the writer and the reader. And so if you've got an authentic experience that you're putting into a fictional character, and on the other side, a person is reading it and going, I can relate, I feel this, you've done your job as a writer. And thank you for that encouragement. I will continue to write. Thank you.
I often tell my wife this, and she doesn't always believe me, but I usually I'll tell her, you know what? One of the amazing things about writing fiction is that you do help people, and and then you even think of something like a horror novel or even a horror movie or something, and you can go through these, and you're experiencing the trauma but from a safe distance. But
Safe,
yeah,
yeah.
not everyone's like me. Like when I get into a book or into a movie, I get so engrossed in it, the rest of the world disappears. And I heard people shouting in my ear before, and I haven't even realized that. And it's really been funny. People have been looking at me like, can you not hear them shouting in your ear? I'm like, huh? What?
Wow.
And but I'll get so
Wow.
engrossed like I'm there, I'm in that person's situation, and I'm going
Wow.
through the experiences they're going through, I'm processing the grief, and so that when that actually happens in real life to me, I've been there. I've been there. I know what it's like,
Yeah.
but I mean, it's still hard and everything at that point, or it's not depending on what the experience is, but I feel like that even in fiction, you can help people process things, and you don't have to be preachy either. You can just the story
You don't want to
itself.
be
Yeah,
preachy. Right. You don't want to be preachy. And one of the things you said, I want to pick up on, and that is the whole detached. Even though you're coming from a place of personal pain, you're sort of detached because you're pouring it into a different character. You are not presenting this character as you, it's as this creation. And so you're one step removed from that character, and yet you're pouring, the personal stuff into him. So it makes it, I think, a little easier to do in some sort of uncanny way.
I think we have hit it. We did job. But if there was any if there were two pieces of advice, and maybe there's something we've talked about before, and maybe there's something we haven't hit on. If there were two pieces of advice that you could give any author out there, what would it be?
Two things. One is breathe. Just take a breath and find out where you are. Be aware of who you are, what your situation is, what your interests and desires are, what you're good at. And my hunch is that if you are a wannabe writer, then there's probably a story kicking around in there. And the other bit of advice, and this kind of speaks to writer's block, is when it comes time to sit down at the keyboard or with your pen and notebook, you can get hung up on whether it should be first person or third person. And that question immediately can cause you to freeze up. Oh my God, should it be first? Should it be third? Am I going to make a mistake? And we can talk ourselves out of getting going. My suggestion, it's just a suggestion, write the first draft in first person because that's your comfort zone. That's how you talk. That's how you tell stories. So it's going to flow much more easily. It may be that the story need not be told that way, but that's why God created rewrites. That's when you can go back and say, it's going to be better this way. But by this time, you've got it out there, and now you can, rejigger it to make it better.
Excellent. Thank you so much for all the bits of wisdom and experience you brought to this. We're going to wrap this up here shortly, but I want to just give you a few rapid-fire questions because I think it's fun.
This is the hard part. This is the hard part.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So what would be your favorite fiction novel?
What would it be, or what is it?
Sorry. What is it?
Okay. Well, it's The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck.
That's a good one.
That's what got me interested in writing fiction.
All right. Do you have a favorite nonfiction book?
No, I like a lot of them.
All right. Do you lean more heavily towards like biographies or self-help books or anything like that?
Not self-help so much. Definitely biography. I'm reading Robert Reich's biography or memoir right now. Memoir, I think, is always interesting. Biographies. There's so many of them out there.
I've never read a memoir before. How is that different from not pretty much the same thing?
Autobiography is pretty much, this is my life in totality. Memoir is more thematic. Nora Ephron made a career out of writing memoir because she focused on different aspects. David Sedaris writes memoir because he focuses on different things.
Okay, and I've read his before.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm reading Michael J. Fox has written a couple of memoirs because there are different parts of his life that he's focusing on. So yeah. But that's essentially the difference.
Are you ever going to write a memoir?
I did write a memoir, and I'm shopping it. I'm shopping it now. It basically, I've identified the pivotal moments in my life that got me to where I am.
That's interesting. I will have to look out for that.
Yeah, I'll look out.
In a good way. What's your favorite movie?
Tootsie.
Tootsie, I love that movie.
Hands down, because it works on so many different levels. Sure, it's a guy in drag. Yeah, that's funny, but it's much deeper in that. And I think that the core there is honesty and truth. I heard an interview with Dustin Hoffman, and he said that he got the idea because he went to one of his makeup artist friends and said, make me look like the most beautiful woman that you can. And so the guy works his magic, and Dustin Hoffman looks in the mirror and goes, that's as good as you can do? And the guy says, yeah, dude, it's about as good as it's going to be. And Hoffman started crying because Dorothy, the character in Tootsie, is not, he said, this is not the kind of woman I would ever have spent time talking to at a party because she wasn't gorgeous. And he said, I know I'm an interesting person. And he said, that tells me that I missed so many opportunities to connect with women who are interesting and deep, but I missed that opportunity because I only judged it on a superficial level. He said, for me, Tootsie, because of that, was not a comedy.
That's so interesting because the theme of Tootsie is right along with his own personal revelation there, and that's interesting. I love hearing that. I'd never heard that story.
Right, and it's on YouTube. I mean, you can Google it, and he tells the story in his own words, probably better than, more authentically than I did. But I think that there's a line in Tootsie where it says, I was a better man with you as a woman than I ever was as a man, something like
I remember
that.
that one.
You
Yeah.
know, yeah, and it goes back though to what I was talking about earlier about listening to women, asking them questions. What's it like to be a woman? And so he was learning in real time by interfacing with the Jessica Lange character. And so, guys tend to put women on pedestals, especially beautiful women, and they compliment them about how beautiful they are. To the woman, that's boring. They hear that all the time. They want to be known for their mind, and they want to banter and have fun. And so I just learned so much from the women in my life. And I just find women fascinating. And I wish more guys understood that and didn't see them as I used to as conquests.
Amen. So, if you could have lunch with any actor, actress, writer, filmmaker, or anyone like that, who would it be?
I think I'd want to talk to Hitchcock again.
Yeah.
Now that there's been some, now that I've learned a lot more about creativity, I would want to have a follow up, and get to, and and there's been so much written about him, and he was a complicated person, and I'm not sure how self-aware he was, and so I would love to have a more in-depth conversation with him, and go deeper than I had in that first time. I don't know if he'd be willing to do that.
I would just love to even be in his presence.
Yeah, right.
I'm a little jealous that you got to meet him.
I know. Sorry. Deal with it.
Okay, I'll deal with it. Do you have a favorite go-to karaoke song or singing in the shower song?
Yes. You've got a friend.
A beautiful song. What about, is there any quote that really hit you that you love that you wish you had written?
Well, that Dustin Hoffman line about, I'm a better man because of being a woman, although I'm not. There was actually, I was at a writer's, I was doing a speaking event, and a woman in the back raised her hand and said, "What do you wear when you write?" And I mean, I'm a straight male, so I wasn't able to, but I write in my jammies, so my answer wasn't particularly satisfying. But, I've never cross-dressed or anything like that to get into the mindset. But, I think that line about, being a better man because of the women in my life, I think that really sums up a lot of the journey that I've been on.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for being on here. This has been fun. I've loved the stories. I've loved hearing your experiences. Is there anything else that you would like to share with us, or anything that you would like to? I know that you've got your recent book that's just coming out here. What is there anything else that you'd like to go over before you share with us anything about that?
Okay, a couple of quick things. I've been talking about how wonderful women are. I don't think I acknowledged my wife, Cindy. Cindy and I have been together 47 years, and we've survived the death of our son. We're still together after that. She's a magnificent person, tremendously creative, a good writer, although she doesn't think so, a very good communicator. She's tolerated me for a long time, and I'm a better man because of her in my life. So, Cindy, I love you, man. As far as enemies domestic, it's taken from the oath of office for government officials. People who are sworn in pledge to protect the Constitution, defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And in enemies domestic, Lark is White House press secretary. It's her first day on the job. She's pregnant, ambivalent about becoming a single mom. The dad is dead. Abortion is a crime, and a dictator becomes president. It could never happen, but be that as it may. And then you can get a hold of me, find out about my editing, my speaking at my website, johndedakis.com. It's a tricky Greek name, so I'll spell it John, D as in dog, E, D as in dog, A, Kis as in Sam, johndedakis.com.
Well, thank you again for being willing to share your experiences and your life lessons here with us today. And hey, if you're out there, if this was any value to you at all, and I hope it was definitely to me, then please remember to like, subscribe, review, comment, share it with all your friends. Thank you so much, John, for visiting with us today.
Brent, thank you. This was a joy.
All right, we'll see you all next time.